I often get quite a bit out of the Time for All Ages portion of our service, especially sometimes. Sometimes it's just a reminder of a principle or how we should behave toward each other or a way of looking at things. But sometimes it prompts deeper questions that I have to ponder for a while. One day recently, Marcia asked the kids if they knew what a covenant was. While she waited for their response, I thought about it myself. The first word that came to my mind was a promise. And it is a sort of promise, but a promise is one-sided. I promise I will do a certain thing, or I promise I won't tell anybody about what you did. But a covenant is an agreement among a group, maybe as small as two, or a very large group. We, together, promise to each other that we will do certain things. More recently, we heard a sermon by a guest, the Reverend Taylor Connerly of the United Church of Christ. He also had a story for the kids, which I'm going to use as well. If you heard it already, well, some things bear repeating. Reverend Connerly asked if the kids liked to color, and they agreed. Then he asked if they were the sort who colors inside the lines, or if they preferred a more free-form approach. Then he told a story about two children coloring. I don't remember the names he used, but I'll call them Alice and Ben. Alice worked very hard on a picture she wanted to give to her mother, but partway through, she had to leave. So she asked Ben if he would finish it for her and give it to her mother. Now, Alice always carefully colored within the lines, while Ben often scrawled. But he was a good friend and wanted to finish her work as she would have, so he carefully stayed within the lines. He also found a place where she had made some mistakes and went over the line. So he took an eraser and cleaned it up so it would be as good as possible. Although not spoken, Ben had a covenant with Alice to finish her work and correct any mistakes he found. In his sermon, Reverend Connerly talked about settlers in Oregon and the often racist attitudes they had toward the people already here, including comments about Reverend Atkinson, by the way, and how, while we can honor their contributions, we should also work to correct their mistakes. Which brings me to the subject of this reflection, the covenant we have between generations. It may be unspoken, but nonetheless, it is there. My father's been gone for over 30 years, but I still hear his driving instructions every time I get in the car. Turning the wheels is easier if the car is in motion. Don't look at the headlights at night. Keep your eye on the right-hand side of the lane. And I try to honor that effort of his. But I also hear the voice of one of my professors as I was leaving for graduate school on the East Coast. Watch out for very smart, competitive Jews from New York. That kind of message from my ancestors is out there too. Sounds like I need to get an eraser. We try to make the world we live in a better place for our children, and in return, they try to complete our work. At the same time, they need to correct our mistakes, as we try to do with those who came before us. I'll end with a couple of quotes. The first from former Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau. "The past is to be respected and acknowledged, but not to be worshipped." And the second from motivational psychologist Adam Grant. "Too many people spend their lives being dutiful descendants instead of good ancestors. The responsibility of each generation is not to please their predecessors, it's to improve things for their offspring. It's more important to make your children proud than your parents proud."
Our reading today is a poem called Ancestry by Fred LaMotte. And he writes, "My DNA results came in, And just as I suspected, my great-great-grandfather was a monarch butterfly. Much of who I am is still wriggling under a stone. I am part larva, but part hummingbird too. There is dinosaur tar in my bone marrow. My golden hair sprang out of a meadow in Palestine. Genghis Khan is my fourth cousin, but I didn't get his dimples. My loins are loaded with banyan seeds from Sri Lanka, but I descended from Ravana, not Ram. My uncle is a mastodon. There are traces of white people in my saliva. 3.7 billion years ago, I swirled in hydrogen dust, dreaming of a planet overgrown with lingams and yanis. More recently, say 60,000 BC, I walked on hairy paws across a land bridge joining Sweden and Botswana. I am the bastard of the sun and moon. I can no longer hide my heritage of raindrops and cougar scat. My mud was molded with your grandmother's tears. I was the brother who marched you to the sea and sold you. I was the merchant from Savannah and the cargo of blackness. I was the chain. Admit it, you have wings, vast and crystal, like mine, like mine. You have sweat, dark and salty, like mine, like mine. You have secrets silently singing in your blood, like mine, like mine. Don't pretend that Earth is not one family. Don't pretend we never hung from the same branch. Don't pretend we didn't come here to forgive. Amen. So as I told the children, discussed with the children, heard from the children, learned new things from the kids. We are made of stardust. A new survey of 150,000 stars shows just how true the old cliche is. Humans and their galaxy have about 97% of the same kinds of atoms. How cool is that? How cool is that poem that we read? I should probably not do this, and I'm just gonna do this, okay? We buried my mother this weekend, and I could not bring myself to sit down and write a sermon about ancestors. And so I am doing something that I have not done since my second year of seminary, and I'm just talking to you. And it will be okay. It will be okay. I do have notes, just for the record. This is not completely off topic. Do you know that we share like 99% of our DNA with chimpanzees? You probably knew that. Do you know that we share like 50% of our DNA with bananas? Wild, huh? Wild. That is the part of our DNA that is our cells and that replicates and creates new cells and somehow absorbs energy from the food we eat and the water we drink or the sun we soak up if we happen to be a banana. We really are all related in ways that we can't even imagine. And We talked on water communion about how all of the water on earth goes through this cycle, or all the drinkable water on earth goes through this cycle. Who can remember the water cycle? The kids could tell me. Michael, can you tell me? I'm giving you a hint, Michael. I'm giving you a hint. Yes, you got it. Good job. So just like the water cycle goes, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur, which has the incredibly challenging what's the word I'm looking for? Every good boy does fine. What's that? That is a, I know that's musical notes, but every good boy does fine is a what from musical, is a mnemonic. So CHNOPS, CHNOPS, is the mnemonic for those things. That's not a super helpful mnemonic for me. I don't know about anybody else, which is why I had to take the page down when I talked to the kids today, because, yeah, anyway. But when so those elements are everywhere. They are in the stars and they are in us. They are in everything around us. They are in every living thing. And so when we talk about ancestors today, I am talking about my great-great-grandfather is a monarch butterfly ancestors, because we are all more related than we can possibly know. We evolved from some very beginning of an animal cell in the sea somewhere that adapted and went into like a multiverse of possibilities, and the one that we came from was something that evolved into a fish that evolved eyes. And they think that actually, scientists now think that eyes were what made the fish crawl up on the land as opposed to developing limbs, because those eyes migrated to the top of their head, and fish could see better out of the water than they could in the water. You only have so far that you can see in the water, but the fish that were on the shoreline could see the bugs on the shore. And if they could get just far enough to eat the bugs that were on the shore, they could evolve further and develop limbs and crawl out. That's why crocodiles probably have those eyes on the top of their heads. Evolution is wild, man. We have all of the creatures of the earth carried within us on some deeply cellular level. And if we share some things in common with banyan trees and bananas, we sure share a heck of a lot with every human that has walked or rolled or crawled on this earth. What if we imagine the whole world as our ancestor? And also, sometimes that's a little overwhelming. And so we look at our own ancestors, whether those are the people we were born to or raised by, or the people who on some level grew us into ourselves. I am pretty darn sure that every single one of you could tell me about somebody really important in your life that you are not related to, that helped you become who you were. Can you? You think about somebody who helped you turn into who you were? Yeah? Yeah? Yeah. Those might not even have been people you knew. For me, My family was incredibly important. I loved them. They were the people who had the most intimate say in who I became and how I am me. I have my mother's smile, which I did not realize until maybe 5 years ago, because I always looked so much like my sister that nobody ever said I looked like my mom. And yet, and we have family who holds us and loves us. And like Elliot was saying, sometimes those families have done some pretty awful things or said some pretty awful things. My Annie Margie, whom I loved more than life itself, and who loved me and was so proud of me, told me when I was a little girl that it would be okay if I married a Jewish man, but she really hoped that I wouldn't marry a colored man because that would be hard on the children. And I only found out really recently that my sister did not have this same warm and loving relationship with Annie Margie, that Annie Margie said to her once, "Well, you're not a pretty girl." And she loved her too, and she said that out of love, but boy, did we have a different experience of that person. And so how we navigate those people that we are directly from, and then how we navigate those other people who paved the way for us in so many other ways, and sometimes in better ways. People who fought back against the police at Stonewall instead of being herded into police wagons and beaten and had their names published in the papers so they lost their livelihoods. Those people were my ancestors too. Those women who fought for the right to vote and the right to have money in their own names, those are my ancestors too. Jerry Spriggs talked about the Oregonian today. And I read and loved those articles and wanted to talk a little bit about that with you today too. The Oregonian, the current publisher of the Oregonian, and I do not remember her name, Teresa somebody. Thank you. About the time of the George Floyd murders, she tasked her newsroom, a couple of reporters from her newsroom, to go and look into what the Oregonian, which is the longest running source of news in Oregon, had to say about race from their founding. And what she found and what the reporters found was really appalling. And they did, I think they did a really excellent job in talking with people of color and experts about how do we say this? What are our blind spots? What are we not seeing? How do we talk about this in ways that don't cause more harm and yet really acknowledge what has been done? Henry Pittock, who was the publisher, and particularly Harvey Scott, who was the editor of the newspaper, put forth incredibly racist and harmful editorials. They advocated that Oregon be a white-only state. They encouraged voters to put racist language in the Constitution, some of which still remains. They encouraged voters to outlaw interracial marriage in the 1800s. And one of the very specific things that they talked about, that there was a whole section on, was when Japanese Americans were interned during World War II. And there was a gentleman who had been interned who wrote an article about it and published it in a different paper. And the Oregonian, without ever going to the place where he was interred, went to another place which was kind of a stopgap place for folks who were sent off to other places that were effectively concentration camps. And said, oh no, these people are all really happy. No one's complaining. They have good food. Yeah, there's some manure, like 50 thing over the line, but and it's kind of noisy there, but no one's complaining. They're all happy. Took some pictures of folks, all smiling at the camera. Put out really false news on purpose to harm the reputation of this man and to make it so white folks in Oregon didn't take this seriously, thought, it's really not bad, this is all necessary. The Japanese understand that it's necessary according to this article in the Oregonian, which I'm going to believe. So my question is, if we are all responsible, what do we do in cases like this? And to me, the phrase that I keep coming back to is, when you know better, you do better. And I wanted to raise up the Oregonian because they did some really horrific stuff. And now they know better and they are trying to do better. And so my question for us, if we are related to the monarch butterflies and the banyan trees, but we are also distinctly children of folks who have done some really sad things, what are we responsible to do? And I think it kind of comes down to, once we know better, and we know better now, that we have to do better. Because we are all tied up in one great mass of humanity, of life, of stardust. May it ever be so, my friends. May it ever be so. Blessed be, and amen.